welcome everybody. This is our lost count. Is it our fifth meeting or anyway? This is another installation of our Dostoevsky meetups, going through the demons. We're in the thick of things, and hopefully you guys are still enjoying the reading and learning, having different insights, lots to share. I think it's going to be an interesting discussion tonight. We have our censored chapter that was thrown out in the original publication, but hopefully you had a chance to read it. And then we have some very interesting discussions taking place between the main characters. So just before we get into the meetup, just want to make sure that everyone caught this discussion we had just prior to the beginning, that we probably will have an extra session as a wrap up to talk about, to look back on the entire work and just to see what the takeaways are. So we'll email everyone as to the dates and times, but it probably is just going to be another 2-week interval before we have this final meetup. Let me see. Okay. Okay. All right, without further ado, let me share my screen so we can just do as a refresher of the main characters. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I've added a couple of characters to our lineup here. The two characters I've added, let me see, I'm still learning how to use this annotate feature here. Let's see. So we have monk Tikhon, or Tikhon in Russian, and we have Shigalev, the two characters that we have not talked too much about previously, but they both deserve some time today. So I wanted to mention them. So should I leave this up, or I guess let's leave it up for a little bit. So the plot keeps going forward with this idea of secret societies and riots that are planned in the country. And of course, the main conspirator is Pyotr Stepanovich Verkhovensky, this character right here. And then together with him, we have the co-conspirators there in the upper right-hand corner, and then Shigalev, starting with Shigalev, who is the new addition to this chart, and then everyone else, the Lyamshin, Liputin, Virginsky, his wife, and then even just below them, we realize that Yulia Mikhailovna von Lemke, the wife of the governor, is somewhat responsible for everything that's happening. She is aware of everything that's happening. She has a very interesting attitude to what's happening, this sort of soft control, possibly appeasement. And we're kind of seeing, as things are developing, the unrest in town, the riots of the workers. Of course, another part of a notable part of the plot is this arrest of the books of Stepan Trofimovich Verkhovensky, who is in some ways the main figure when it comes to the upbringing and ideas. That he's the father, in a sense, of all the ideas that have been planted in these young minds, including Stavrogin, including Verkhovensky, pretty much all of them, really. Shatov, maybe not Kirillov so much, but just about all of them have been influenced by him. So that's as far, that's the summary of the plot as far as what's happening. But more importantly, there are these conversations which reveal the philosophical underpinnings of the work and the philosophy, both of the revolutionaries, and then as a counterpoint to that, the meeting with Tikhon, who obviously represents a very different take on everything that's happening, a sort of a moral, religious, conservative, if you will, representation. And I also was thinking that he might be a counterpoint to Semyon Yakovlevich, the prophet prophet in quotes that we met last time, and was also very entertaining in some ways. But also, I think in some ways he's presented as a false prophet, at least by Dostoevsky. Maybe we can talk about that. But of course, Tikhon is the recipient of Stavrogin's confession, the confession of his terrible crime of seducing this young girl, a child really, and she ends up killing herself. So that's another major part of the plot and of the, I guess, philosophy and inner world of these characters that I hope we have time to explore. Let me stop this for a second, just so, because it's hard for me to talk. Just looking at the picture, I don't actually see the faces of anybody. What I'm gonna let Doug and CJ maybe say a few words, and then I want to take a little bit of time going over Shigalov and his philosophy, because I think it's really crucial to understand it in the scheme of things, what it is that he's proposing, and because I think it's so relevant to our times and just sort of philosophy of social development in general. So, Doug, do you want to start us off? Maybe share some of your thoughts, and then we'll go to CJ, and then we'll see how we go from there.
Yeah, I probably won't talk very long right now, unless memories come back to me. I finally caught up in my reading about a week ago, and then because of some things in my personal life, disengaging from some boards I'm on, I didn't get a chance to review it. So it's just been steeping in me, which is sometimes a good thing to do, just see what do you remember. And it definitely took a number, I mean, looking at it in terms of dramatic terms, a number of radical kind of shifts stylistically, and as CJ's often commented, the comedy of it. And the confession is really amazing, and it's strange to read it in context and then try to imagine the novel without the confession, which is, once you know it, it's sort of hard to sort of put that out of your mind and imagine what the novel was before people read that. That's a truly amazing section, almost a film all of its own. I mean, that section is just like, could be not even necessarily a short film, a very interesting. So I guess you said you're pulling pictures from a mini series, right? Of this, right?
Yes.
Which is definitely, there's a huge mini series in this novel. I think what really struck me was one, the confession, one, this sort of fairy tale prince, which takes it to this whole different level, and then the confession at Tikhon, and that figure, that religious figure, is very fascinating, and the kind of relationship they develop through the scene is a whole nother thing I haven't fully digested. It's just a question. And then the search and the panic. It's like Stepan seems to, the thing he fears most is a search, and yet somehow he thinks he deserves a search. You know, he's been such an important figure. They should be searching me, and then they do, and he's totally terrified. And he does decide to go right to von Lemke, and then that scene, the fatal morning. I mean, fatal is one way to describe it, but with him kind of going off in a carriage and people carriages here and there. There's something really farcical about these carriages. It's like the Great Race, or one of those comedies with cars and carriages running all over the place. I mean, and then he comes into town with his arm up and he sweeps into town, totally misunderstands what's going on. And the confusion of the word, there's somebody's name is something associated to freebooter, and then it's misunderstood to mean pirates and freebooters, and it's just really it's suddenly the play turns into, out of Shakespearean comedy or tragedy, into comedy of errors. I mean, just the error after error after error, and how these. And because everybody's sharing different stories, I think I've become more convinced that the stories and the gossip are kind of the demons in this novel to a great degree. Once you set loose a rumor and a counter rumor to maybe nullify the rumor you yourself have maybe put out in the world, then it starts to just become incredibly surreal. And because I was dealing with some power issues in a nonprofit I'm involved in, which actually resolved very well. At the end of the meeting, everybody agreed. That's not the world of this book, though. At the end of any meeting, there's like more chaos than you go into the meeting. And so I've kind of been living this out in my life. Happily, it kind of turned out well, I think. But it was, so that's the sort of, I'm really fascinated to move now into the end of the book, because there's clearly a lot of danger in the wings that is going to be, going to be emerging. So
right. Okay. Well, thanks, Doug. That's very interesting about the rumors. It's yeah, it's definitely something to think about. CJ, do you want to add some of your thoughts?
Yeah, the Shigalov material was in chapter 7, right, which was 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
But that'd be good to come back to. In chapter 8, the fairy tale prince is actually the language that Peter Verkovensky uses in talking about Stavrogan. And what I found interesting about that chapter was the way in which Stavrogan appears as this hoped for Messiah kind of character. You know, I mean, Columbus, which we don't no longer think of as a Messiah, but, you know, at that time, European Western thinking people did. But I had trouble in chapter 8. My question there is, what does Peter Verkovensky actually believe? He tells us what he believes. I'm a nihilist. Then it manifests that maybe he's just a crook, a thief. You know, what is his vision? What does he believe? Jeannie reread it, so I'll be interested to hear if she figured something out. But that, for me, that was just a question. You know, he starts explaining it, and then the interaction with Stavrogan, it never really clarified for me what is driving Peter Verkovensky. But that's the subject of this chapter 8 in large part. The chapter 9 at Tikhon's was very important. I picked up on the literature of psychiatry as an aspect of it, the way in which Tikhon is like a psychologist or a psychiatrist. The word psychiatry is coined in 1802. The first psychiatric hospital in Russia opens in St. Petersburg in 1859, but we're many decades before Freud. What was interesting from that is Tikhon not just listens. The modern approach to psychiatry and psychology is to listen and ask, you know, why do you believe that? What's going on for you? But here, Tikhon actually jumps in and predicts that Stavrogan is going to do something evil. I don't know many psychiatrists that would predict you're about to do something evil, but maybe psychiatry hadn't developed at that point. I thought that was, and I was very puzzled the way Tikhon says that Stavrogan wronged. I didn't write her name down. Mikosha.
Matryoshka.
And with an act of violence, my translation calls it an act of violence, but in what I read, it was hard for me to identify in what way Stavrogan wronged her. Now I can infer from the missing page that he wronged her very seriously, but Tikhon didn't read that page, nor did I. So does he just infer it? Is this an inference of an act of violence that we don't know, or did I misread that?
Well, he seduced her and raped her, basically. I mean, it would be statutory rape, I guess, in modern terminology.
Well, from what we read, she kissed him, but we don't know what happened after that.
Well,
there's a missing page. Now I can infer, but should I infer? I mean, you know, the conservative in me says don't infer. You know, read what's on the page. What's on the page ends with the 12-year-old making a move on the elder gentleman. And I don't see where the elder gentleman, he wronged her. You know, I mean, I can infer.
Well, look, sometimes you really have to read between the lines. I mean, it's pretty obvious from the context that he seduced her. In fact, what she says later is the key to that. She says, "I killed God," and she hangs herself. So obviously, she realized, she's old enough to realize that something with whatever they did was wrong, based on whatever religious upbringing or moral upbringing that she had. And all of it together with her being, it's not so much the sexual part, I think, is not really the problem. Well, it is the problem, the immediate problem, but the problem is he seduced her. He took her innocence from a child, and that's emphasized several times, that she's just a child, and he saw that in her. That's what attracted him to her, was the fact that she was in fact just a child. A 10-year-old. We actually get her age. She's a 10-year-old child, and the whole conversation later is predicated on the fact that he needs forgiveness. He knows he committed a terrible thing, and he is looking for forgiveness, and he's not getting it, and that's part of the problem for him.
Well, maybe my literal reading style failed me there. In chapter 10, the search of Stepan Verkovensky, to me, that just seemed like setup for the chaos of the last chapter in our reading, chapter 11, Freebooters of Fatal Mourning. Doug finally explained freebooters is this joke. I got the joke that freebootin' reports on freebootery, which it wasn't, which is wrong. But before the call, I was like, what does this have to do with freebootery? Nothing in the situation is freebootery. There's no freebootery. So why is the chapter heading freebootery or freebooter?
I wish they had translated it like that. I wish they had translated it with the word that was used, which is filibuster. Obviously, we talked about this, I think, in the beginning, that the word had changed from its original meaning, which is pirate. So in the original translation, the word that's used is flibustiere, which is from the French, le filibuster or something like that. My French is terrible. But it is a French word, and it literally means pirate. And the meaning there is, well, we can.
Well, there are no pirates. Doug did a good job explaining the comedy and how the word is used. but again, my literal reading led me to a big question mark. And the fatal morning, I mean, since the beginning, you've told us that the novel is based on a real life killing. So I've been looking forward to the killing. And I thought a fatal morning, this is it. No one's killed.
Sorry to disappoint you.
So, I did want to pick up on one of the big themes that I got out of chapter 11 was this narration with Anton Governov, who we don't even really know what it is. I mean, we've seen enough of his narration. It's at the point where I almost get the feeling the way he explains why I'm going to narrate this chapter this way, and that he's explaining this sort of as testimony after whatever the ultimate blow up is to the authorities. But maybe he's just, telling this story over vodka at a bar. I don't know. But the way in which his testimony incorporates all these, as Doug explained it well, all this rumor. So you have the Moscow and Petersburg papers reported the firemen drenching the crowd. But then he himself says, but I don't know anyone who knows that, so I don't think it was true. But I did read it in the Moscow and Petersburg paper. So he's very freely sharing rumors, our narrator, and then sort of telling us how this rumor's probably not true and that rumor's probably not true. And in the end, I think we can all agree that it must be, this is what happened. But I, as a reader, can't even accept his inferences because it's basically chasing one rumor after another. And I'm not sure what happened. So that's I think that I like Doug's idea that might be the demon, because that element of the narration that's all through and that's been challenging me all through is very remarkable, whether it's the demons or not. That's a good hypothesis.
Right. Doug, did you want to say something?
I wanted to comment on a couple of things. But it's so confusing, the sequencing there, that I think what happens, well, there's the somebody mentions Freebooten's name, and the von Lemke is so crazy at that point, he thinks they're pirates. And so that's how he starts to behave, based on his interpretation of the misunderstanding of a word. And then he also has been sent a letter, which hasn't been explicated yet, this letter that tells him there's a big conspiracy going on and somebody's out to destroy everybody. And the German says, I'll investigate. And he says, well, no. But von Lemke then says something that makes him feel empowered to go search Stepan's house, which then he's punished for and humiliated for going to search Stepan's house, who is determined to be innocent of all wrongdoing because he's fairly harmless, actually.
Yeah.
But it sets up this environment. So when he comes back, these guys are just there for a labor dispute, like pay us our wages. He sees as terrible radicals, which is, when they're just there to say, you owe us money. And it's this ritual thing. So it's a total comedy of errors. Everybody is misinterpreting who's in front of them and what they're actually doing. And so
some of it is purposeful, though, right?
Yes.
There's a reason why things are being misinterpreted, because somebody is behind all of this, and we already kind of have a feeling who that is, because of other terrible misunderstandings and
exactly.
Let me just, before I open the floor to...
I did want to say one other thing about the sexuality and that issue, because that's very ambiguous. But I remember reading about Robert Louis Stevenson. his son, I think, and was talking about Stevenson and Dickens. And he was saying, if they had the freedom to write about sexuality the way the French and the Russians did, they would be the greatest novelists in the world. But the British weren't allowed that. And
Well,
even the
apparently
Russians.
Dostoevsky wasn't allowed either because this chapter was censored.
Right.
And it
So
doesn't
that's what
really
I'm.
have anything in it.
So in
Yeah.
a way, that missing page is like the movie screen fading to black. And in the post-code movies in Hollywood, they couldn't really suggest what happens when they fade to black. So that's
Right.
left to the audience interpretation to read as innocent or evil. The
And
fade
let
to
me
black.
let me just say while I'm thinking about it, so I won't forget. At the time this was written, there were official, they called them houses of temperance, or they should really call them houses of intemperance, which were places where you could go and pay a prostitute to have sexual intercourse with, sex workers, we call them today. Anyway, places like that existed, and they had clientele there that was as young as that girl Matryoshka. So it wasn't anything new or shocking to the readers, the readers of Dostoevsky. However, there's a difference between reality and what passes censorship. And this idea that of normalizing it or even bringing it to light was apparently too big of a pain point for the censors to allow this chapter to come through. I just want to, I know a lot of you want to participate. Allison, I see your exclamation point. I just want to take a little bit of time before we do this. I want to go back a little bit to the philosophy of these, quote, revolutionaries. And I mean in quotes because it's obvious that they don't have a plan, they're not organized, but they're ready for something. They're waiting for somebody to catalyze whatever pent up frustration with life they have or whatever it is that's bugging them. And then of course we have Piotr Verkhovensky, who takes advantage of all of this and manipulates them. But among them is this person who in some ways is very characteristic and representative of the Russian radical movement of that time. In fact, some of his ideas repeat the prototype of this novel, Sergei Nechayev, who I mentioned in the very beginning, the actual real life character who inspired Dostoevsky to write this. So Shigalov actually repeats, or rather, maybe I should put it this way, Dostoevsky puts Nechayev's ideas into Shigalov's mouth and speaks to the thought processes that guided these revolutionaries, these radical revolutionaries of the late 1800s in Russia. I want to read a couple of passages. I don't want to, because Dostoevsky actually, he spells it all out for you, so I don't want to talk about it. I just rather read what he says. And first thing I want to read is in the very beginning, when we first met Shigalov, there's a very good description of him. And it says, he looked as if he were anticipating the destruction of the world, not at some time in the future, according to prophecies that might come or might not even come to pass, but as a fixed and definite thing, the day after tomorrow, let's say precisely at 10:25 in the morning. What struck me the most of all were his unnaturally large ears, long, wide, broad, and sticking out in a rather peculiar way. His movements were clumsy and slow. If Liputin had in fact ever dreamed that a phalanstery could be established in our province, then this man certainly knew the day and the hour it would happen. He had produced a sinister impression on me, and so on and so forth. So that's the first time we meet him, and we just get this idea that he's a very morose type of individual, sullen and morose, is what Dostoevsky, how he describes him. And then next time we meet him is at the actual get together of these would-be conspirators. And find the spot where I have. So the next time we meet him is the meeting of the co-conspirators, where he stands up and he proposes his grand system. And his system, he says, is a final solution to the question, is the division of mankind into two unequal parts. 1/10 to receive personal freedom and unlimited rights over the remaining 9/10. The latter are to lose their individuality and turn into something like cattle. And with this unlimited obedience attained through a series of regenerations, a primordial innocence, something like the primordial paradise, although they will have to work. And the measures proposed by the author for depriving 9/10 of mankind of their will and refashioning them into a herd by means of re-education is most remarkable and very logical. Although he does say just before this that he has become entangled in his own data, and his conclusion stands in direct contradiction to the initial idea from which it started. Proceeding from unlimited freedom, he ends with unlimited despotism. But there's no other solution except for this grand system that he proposes. So here's this man who writes up this big treatise, completely contradictory, but with these illusions of grandeur that he is going to, solve the issues that plagued mankind for, millennia. But his solution, of course, is okay. Let's create 10%, 90%, and then he becomes even more radical and says that in order to fulfill all this, we need 100 million deaths to boot, to achieve this utopia, to achieve this paradise, equality for everyone. Now, the reason I'm going back to this is because in the next chapter, the one that we actually read in this section, Piotr Verkhovensky, when he begs Stavrogin to join him and become this messiah, as CJ pointed out, become this figurehead for their movement, their revolutionary movement, he says Shigalovism, which is the philosophy that Shigalov is proposing, is actually very, very good, very logical. And here's why. So let me find this part. 1 second. This is Verkhovensky speaking. Shigalov's got the spying down. He has each member of society watching the others and obliged to inform on them. Each belongs to all and all to each. All are slaves and are equal in their slavery. In extreme cases, there's slander and murder, but the main thing is equality. The first thing is to lower the level of education, science, and accomplishment. A high level of science and accomplishment is accessible only to people of high ability, and there's no need for high ability. People of high ability have always seized power and been despots. So I thought, we can obviously talk about anything you guys want, but I thought this idea of equality as the highest ideal, as the highest virtue, which by the way is very popular today. It hasn't been before. I think we've always had this idea of meritocracy as a worthy goal, meritocracy for everyone. But this idea of equality, and especially of how do we achieve this equality? Is it by raising everybody up? No, it's by dumbing everything down to a certain level where everybody is equal. And of course, he ends with saying, Cicero had his tongue cut out, and we need to, and he says that Copernicus had his eyes put out. He didn't really, but I guess he wishes that Copernicus had his eyes put out, and he wishes that Shakespeare was stoned, because these people do not fit into this mold of everybody is equal. So this is a big part of the overall discussion, and I wanted to bring that as part of, maybe possibly part of our discussion tonight. I'm very curious what you think about this idea. So with that, I'm going to open it up to anyone who wants to contribute their thoughts. Just type in exclamation points so I can see who, just keep track of the order of people that want to share, and we'll open it up to everybody. Allison, go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking that this chapter at Tikhon's is really there to show Stavrogin's mindset. And it really, I thought it was like a pretty shocking chapter, but I think it was also probably one of the most important chapters, really. And the other thing that some of the things that I thought were just mind-boggling, like there's one line where he says, after he rapes her, like a few days later, he's like, and generally I was bored with life. Then to the point of stupefaction. Like he's just so unfeeling about what he did. And it just made me think about sociopaths. It made me think about serial killers. It just, the other thing that I felt like was interesting was the whole idea of Peter choosing him to be like the leader. And then it made me think a lot about Stalin. And then I kept kind of thinking, are people who lead things, are they chosen, or is it that a certain type of person rises to that or is drawn to that? But what I thought was just truly mind-boggling was the way, I mean, yes, he wanted to talk about it, he wrote this confession, but really for the most part, he didn't seem to feel much of anything about it, you know?
Is it true though?
What?
Is it true though that he didn't feel anything?
Why not? He didn't feel much really.
Well, he felt something maybe very sinister, I think. Here, let me read this little passage, maybe, and this is what this is why I'm maybe questioning a little bit your analysis. I hope you don't mind, Alison. This is what he says, and this is from the chapter at Tikkens. Every situation in my life in which I have ever happened to find myself, however unspeakably shameful, utterly degrading, vile, and most importantly ridiculous, has always aroused both boundless anger and unbelievable pleasure in me. So he actually takes pleasure in this shame, in this vileness, in this, there's something in him that craves this. So I wouldn't say he's not feeling anything. He feels, but he feels the wrong thing.
Well, that was it. Because I remember that exact section. And it really bothered me because I kept thinking like, you know, is that what a serial killer feels when, you know, I mean, I don't know. I don't read those. I don't watch those shows. I don't want to read those books. I don't know. But I imagine like if they feel this need to do this again and again and again, are they getting some sort of a thrill from it? And I felt like this chapter was the most, I don't know, like psychological portrait of somebody in that situation that I've ever read.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and it was the thing that I thought was interesting. It wasn't like he was turned on or attracted to her. It wasn't out of anger. It was just a joy. Like it was a pleasure. But like a sick pleasure, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Maritza, and then Joe, and then Madeline.
So that chapter at Tikkens was interesting because, you know, it's almost on a side to the section we're reading. But I do agree with Allison in that it gives us an insight into the inner workings of Nikolai's thoughts. But I saw it also as a much deeper thing than just that. I feel like the moral that the author is trying to present to us, it's all contained in this one chapter. I mean, through this chapter, I understand that I am being told in no uncertain terms that those without a belief in God are lost. I mean, it's in every sentence, every statement. It's fascinating. It's brilliantly done, obviously. But what we're presented, he even says there's a line in this chapter where, you know, Nikolai says he wishes to rid himself of this indifference. And he talks about a demon that's upon him. But what he's describing, it's not a literal demon. He describes to us a demon as being this ennui, where if nothing matters, why not act out however the hell I want? There are no consequences because I have no beliefs. That's what I'm hearing in this chapter. I'm really hearing very strongly that, you know, if those who don't fall into line with the belief system are lost. That's really what I'm hearing. But the fascinating thing is that the flip is true, that because what I'm also being told is that even if I think I don't have faith, somehow, if I'm tortured, I do. Because what he's told is that even though, he's told that he's tortured by the ghost of this little girl that he raped, and we'll use raped, but it doesn't actually matter if he literally raped her, because if we remember the times in which this was done, the liberties he took with her in that time frame could be tantamount to rape. There were times in which the liberty of a kiss, and then he talks about fondling. I don't know, I'm sure different versions give different things, but CJ talks about the inference, but I think despite the inference not leading to the absolute culmination, right, of saying, I took her innocence, there's enough of a picture painted that in those times, those types of liberties were not, like, we live in modern times, somebody sharing a steamy kiss in a corner is of no import. It is if it's a child, right? But it's even back then, had she been a woman, those liberties would have been just like a horror, as it were, would have been a villainous thing for him to do, non-gentlemanly. So, but he's tortured by her. And so what he's telling us is of all his misdeeds, because this is, Dostoevsky titles this chapter, when it was released later, it was actually, it was called The Confession of a Sinner, or The Life of a Sinner, I forget, but something along those lines. So what we're hearing is the tale of a sinner. And it's interwoven in almost every sentence of this chapter. It's the age-old question of, belief, whether or not God exists despite your faith. And I think that what the attempt made here is to prove to us that yes, God exists. Even if you have no faith, he's still there. I'm not saying this is my belief, but I'm saying that's what I'm seeing, that I'm being fed in this chapter. Right. I'm painted this surreal story that, the shock value, right? This would have been great sensationalist journalism for today's era, the manner in which it unfolds. But I think that's, it's just a really convoluted way of saying that we show you this man who believes himself to be godless or lacking in belief in God. But the very fact that he is tortured means that he is. So he feels tortured for his lack of belief, but it's the very self-same torture that proves the existence of a God and what will ultimately be his redemption. So I don't know, that's maybe it's an oversimplification.
Right. No, that's very good. Very good. Joe, and then Madeline.
Yeah, I think Maritza really captured it well. I think that there's another interesting, I think that there's a reason Stravogan, Nikolai, I'll just make it easy on myself here, is he's also the Christ-like figure for Peter. Like he's the person. So not only that, he's got to make him the Antichrist, or Dostoevsky makes him the Antichrist. So this is not only like, this is what it's like we're holding up as our pinnacle, and this is what is going to save us, this individual. So he is actually the exact opposite, which is what essentially Peter is proposing in his own and in his one of his speeches. And one of the quote that you highlighted is actually something that I found to be so interesting, because this is actually something that happened in the Soviet Union, with the idea that where he mentioned something along the lines of spying, a system of spying, where every member of society spies on the other, and it's a duty to inform against them. Everyone belongs to everyone, and the slaves to the equal in their slavery. In extreme cases, he advocates slander and murder. But the great thing, it's a great thing about equality. But the interesting thing with that, that's actually what happened in the Soviet Union.
Absolutely.
That's absolutely. I when I read that section, I thought to myself, this is crazy. This is unbelievable that he's writing this prior to the fall of the
60
Soviet
years
Union.
prior.
I mean, it's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. One of the other interesting things is, like, going back to Nikolai, is this idea that, oh, he even Peter refers to at some point the making him almost a pope, like, you'll be our pope there's the Pope of the West, and then you're going to be our Pope for here, the revolution. And this idea is kind of like, it to me is it's really kind of all set up to show the other spectrum of what you do when you go against everything. It's not a question of some incremental progress that is being made, like with the society. This is the exact opposite of what you've been following in society all the way up to this point, and what has gotten you here. And I think that's a really, and Nikolai even seems to be like, he is a masochist. I mean, even his marriage, it's completely like everything he's subjecting himself to. It's like complete. If you're going to define what evil is, I guess that's what he kind of represents, even though he's tormented on top of everything else.
Mhm.
So I think that Dostoevsky very much knew what he was doing, and I think that the question that CJ raised is the real question that I really can't figure out. What is Peter's real objective? Because I don't, is it political or is it personal? And we kind of touched on it last time, and it's really not clear. You read, he's just a lunatic, the way he goes off about everything, and I'm like kind of listening to part of this, and I'm trying to read some of it. So it's like I'm going back and forth, but I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, what a psychopath. Like, it's unbelievable. But anyway, I'm trying to think if there was anything else. The reference that you made to Cicero and Shakespeare just shows you that, again, this is another extreme, throw out everything that was meaningful before, and let's just start over and make everybody equal, and this is going to work out the way. But the 90% and the 10% was also a very, very telling point, where he said, essentially they're going to be slaves. It shows you that his vision of Russia is actually no different than maybe what they were experiencing, like with serfdom, in a sense. Well, it was different, it was worse.
Right.
So.
Right. I just want to say, the question is asked about Peter's motives, assuming that he is a rational type of, person. But in this confession, one of the things, or not in this confession, but in this chapter, we find out about Stavrogin that he has these visions, hallucinations, he calls them, but
Right.
It's really open to interpretation. These hallucinations of a evil being that takes on different characteristics, but is actually the same. And when I was reading about this, I was thinking, this actually sounds a lot like Peter Verhovensky to me, because he takes on these different guises, these different masks, yet he's the same person. And it is perhaps a sort of this demonic thing that manifests itself in different ways, but is actually the same. Its purpose is evil. There's no rational purpose. Its purpose is destruction and evil, and kind of like a Joker. I think we mentioned Joker before.
Yeah,
but this idea of watching the world burn for the sake of watching the world burn is very much part of human psyche. Madeline,
which actually, well, just really quickly,
Mhm.
which is actually, it makes him then just anti-Christ almost. It's against any kind of order at
Right.
all, any kind of moral order
or
at
even
all.
or even a step lower before that, any kind of being.
Right. Exactly.
Any kind of
Exactly.
being at all.
That's right. No, and that's
Non-being.
and it's really, and it's illustrated really well. Go ahead.
Madeline, and then Maritza.
Okay, well, this is great. I see a few things happening. First of all, we're forgetting all about poor Stepan Trofimovich. This is his big moment. This is the, sort of the height of his romantic, fanciful relationship with Varvara Petrova, which is, he's important enough to be rated. And so this is the time when he should be flying to her and they will be working together to free him and do all of that. But unfortunately, they're on the outs. So I'm feeling kind of badly for him because, yes, he's genuinely frightened, but this is also something they talked about at the very beginning of the book. I think there is definitely some foreshadowing because there's also been some discussion of hanging before, which was a scene of the guy hanging himself at the inn, and people treating it so callously as sort of tourism. And now we have Nikolai Stavrogin with the little girl he raped hanging herself. And he too, he's sort of, it's kind of entertainment value for him. I definitely agree with Joe. I have been thinking along the same lines of basically all these conspirators have chosen this charismatic sociopath to be their leader. Whether they're able to see, and they're not really able to see through him. He goes right ahead and humiliates the next person at the end of chapter 10. That's his mother. He has just sort of says in front of everyone, you know, oh no, I'm already married. I've married, you know, the girl who's, you know, so much beneath us, basically. You know, she's half-witted, she's lame, she says she's had all these things. And then he just leaves. He's haughty, he doesn't care. Like, this is his thing, is really making people feel bad. And so why someone like Shigalov would choose him. He's got a sort of weird universal panopticon system, Shigalov going. The idea of everyone is spying on everyone else and you never know when someone's spying on you. And bringing everyone down to the same level. I mean, that's certainly what Nikolai Stavrogin is trying to do in a way, is to basically humiliate people and make them feel bad. He's done it to the old guy who he led around by the nose. He bit von Lemke on the ear. He humiliated the other guy in the duel by not even trying. I mean, he does this over and over again. So in a way, he is sort of an emblem for reducing people to the lowest possible level. I did actually think it was very funny that the guy had written a 10-chapter book. And they said, oh no, it would be impossible to organize 10 evenings where we could discuss the chapters. Like, no one wants to read it, obviously. It was funny, but it was also very sad considering what's been going on, like in the US, with the idea of we shouldn't, educated people are a problem, smart people are a problem. Let's just keep everyone at the stupidest level possible. And, you know, in fact, it does go on. I mean, in the early 1980s, the SAT scores were dropping. And so rather than remedy the whole education system, they changed the scoring system. So the scores that had previously been 1,400 were now considered to be 1,600 from then on. So we do that sort of thing all the time. It just doesn't get commented on as much, although it shows up certainly, you know, when we're in international competition with other countries about things.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, thank you, Madeline, for that. I totally agree with a lot of what you said about Stavrogin deriving certain pleasure from this vileness and from putting other people down. But I don't know that it's personal necessarily. I think he derives certain pleasure in doing these things. It doesn't almost matter who the recipient is. That's what strikes me is this idea that it's gratuitous. He's not gaining much from, like, remember that time, that side story of him stealing money and then looking in the eye of the person that he stole it from, just to see if he's going to look back. These psychological games that he's playing.
He also he just lies. You know, he says, oh, she took the penknife. He lies and lies and lies just to make trouble. Pyotr
Here's something
Stepanovich
that,
also lies all the time. They're both
here's-
liars.
Yeah. Here's a trap, I think, for us all when we read this kind of stuff. We, and I'm like I said, I'm including myself in this because I think we're so shocked by it. We think we're not susceptible to any of it. I think naturally. And a lot of us are naturally kind of nice people, kind people. It's hard for us to imagine even thinking and acting this way. However, I think it's a mistake to think that human nature doesn't have an innate urge of some sort of nastiness in it. I think it's a mistake to omit it from the equation, if you will, of human nature. And when I was reading all this about Stavrogin and his confession, I'm going to take a little time here. I was thinking of Augustine's Confessions. And if you've read it, you know there's a passage there, and I want to read it just because it's just one paragraph, about them stealing pears. This is him as a kid or a young man. He was probably the same age, well, maybe a little bit younger than Stavrogin, or maybe the same age at the time when Stavrogin was committing all these things. And he's talking about this pear tree. I'm not going to read it, I'm just going to describe it. The point being there is they have this pear tree. They're not really hungry. They're well-to-do kids. And they just, what they're doing though, is they're hurting another person who grew that pear tree, was hoping for a nice harvest. They take all these pears, they steal it at night, but they don't even eat it. What they do is they throw it to the pigs. And the reason he describes it, I think, is to show that there's something in human nature that has this absolutely irrational part that is like really dark. And when we read about Stavrogin, I think it's a reminder, maybe Dostoevsky wanted to remind us that this part, the darkness there, is pretty dark. and it's a mistake, I think, to rule it out as just a product of lack of education, environment, basically, making whatever excuses we want to make for a fundamental darkness, and which is obviously not all of it, but definitely a fundamental urge to have this destruction and just things that are completely vile in us. And Dostoevsky comes back to it in Notes from Underground when he talks about if somebody builds this palace, this crystal palace, this beautiful place, this paradise on earth, there's going to be some guy who's going to decide, I want to take a rock, I'm going to throw it at that crystal palace, just to throw a rock at the crystal palace. And anyway, I think it's it's something to think about, I guess. Let's see, who do we have? CJ and then Doug. And then Maritza. I'm sorry, Maritza.
I think Joe was ahead of me, wasn't he?
Oh, did I completely well, let's give Maritza a chance, and then Joe, and then Doug.
And
You can let
Maritza
somebody else
also
go.
wanted to go again.
Let's
Let Maritza go. Yeah, she was
Just
first.
said that.
Okay, no, I just I realized I spent all my time talking about Ticons, and I hadn't actually addressed any of your questions from earlier. So I just wanted to round back to just after the meeting when Peter and Nikolai were walking together towards Nikolai's domicile. I just found it interesting that the contrast. So we're presented Nikolai as this, horribly unfeeling monster personality, and yet he's looking at Peter as though he's the monster. So I really found that to be just interesting to see, because I read the scenario of the passage. So I read chapter 8 before I read Atikons. So I had not yet been introduced to the confessions of all of Nikolai's sins. So when I was looking at that, I found myself wondering, oh, am I mistaken? Have I been, hoodwinked by the author? And Nikolai is not quite the one with all the actual demons. Perhaps it's just Peter. And so I was left feeling that because of, he just looked at Peter like he was this insane person. And really, he was speaking feverishly, almost like, and his praise was so weird of Nikolai, like, you're just so beautiful. And it was this, it wasn't, he was glorifying him as the spokesperson for an ideal, but the ideal existed within Peter's mind. Like, he was the one saying, this vision, you're the perfect frontman for it. So, it's interesting there, because I agree with CJ. We have no idea what Peter's true agenda is, because we've seen him go in like 10 different directions.
Comments to a column from New York Times.
Oh no, sorry. There's somebody who's not muted. Sorry, lost my train of thoughts. But so Peter's going like in a bunch of different directions, but I'm starting to get a picture that he really is, maybe he might be the worst of the ones with the demons within them, because Nikolai's demons are very much real, as we've been shown in at Tikhon's. But Peter's it's the demonization of an ideal, because he's the one, he's the one who's embracing what you were talking about on this, he wants to level the playing field.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to take away from everyone and make them all equal, except for him and his favorite people, right?
9/10 and 1/10.
Right, exactly. He needs to be the 1/10, obviously.
Right. Equality,
that,
not for everybody.
Right. And I mean, that's another type of like demon to me. That's like the hubris there, And so it's interesting to see the parallels and differences between those two, because Nikolai is tormented with actual physical demons. Now, he's done these horrible things, but I'm still wondering which is the greater of the two evils, because Nikolai is aware that he has these demons within him. Peter's not. He thinks he's great and wonderful and beautiful, or he doesn't care. He acknowledges he may have some
We don't
flaws.
really know what he thinks yet. There's no
Fair, you're right.
From him.
That's true. So that's, I just want to point out that those, I'm not yet entirely certain who they're trying to shine the spotlight as the truly possessed one. I think that they all are in their own way. And so these two are opposites in some way.
Right.
Thank you.
That's good. That's good. Who do we have? Joe, CJ, Doug, and then Allison.
Yeah, I'll be brief, because I forget somebody hit on my point that I was going to make, but it was essentially about Strogogin's marriage to Leviathan. And I think that has a little bit more significance. I mean, I think Madeline mentioned how he just announces it, ruins his mother's life essentially, and walks out. And I think that it says something else that, it's the way society is being reorganized, right? And if you look at marriage as an institution, it's kind of almost like he's mocking the institution itself. That's kind of something that I've taken away, like kind of where Dostoevsky has this way of actually just every single little anything that had any meaning in society at that particular moment in time had to be destroyed in some way, shape, or form, or mocked at the very least. And I think that's, it's a significant moment. Like, not only does he not care about his mother or anyone else, but he also is kind of mocking the entire institution of marriage, which is actually something in part of that the communist perspective was essentially marriage was a dead institution. So
and I think today it's really, there is no special status of marriage. I mean, besides it being a kind of a legal framework, but before it was a thing regardless of the legal implications of it, it had a sort of this aura of sanctity. I mean, people that broke that marriage contract, for better or worse, were pariahs in society. Again, for better or worse, there were obviously there problems with that too. We all read the Scarlet Letter or whatever.
Exactly.
Things like that. So it's not a simple thing. And Dostoevsky doesn't make it simple for us, but he definitely makes it
Yeah, and it shouldn't be like discounted. Yes, there was subjugation of women, and that's, but it's almost as if it's an interesting concept, this idea of commitment, or even that is being undermined within that
Right.
framework. It's not just there was a subjugation that occurs with marriage, but it's also
Right.
Anyway, it's a double-edged sword. But.
Yeah. Okay. CJ and Doug and Allison.
Yeah, well, picking up on that last thread, I did find, especially the treatment of Julie von Lemke in chapter 11 in my book, that was very sexist. It occurred to me. But what I wanted to go back, the main thing a lot of people are talking about is Tikhon's and Nikolai. And I really hear Allison's and Maritz's feeling that, there's something evil about Stavrogan, but I'm remembering several chapters ago where we discovered that Stavrogan was gracious and honorable. And it's this strange convolution that's hard to situate. Will the real Nikolai Stavrogan please stand up? Is he the sociopath, or is he, the one who did some of the, and Shatov likes Stavrogan, and Shatov is one of the characters that we think he might be speaking for Dostoevsky. So what is that positive side of Stavrogan that we don't, that's hidden, that's missing in at Tikhon's in the confession? I need to read the novel 2 or 3 more times, which I don't plan on doing, but to sort out all these issues, because there are multiple interpretations. That's what I wanted to get at. There's an interpretation where he's a sociopath. There's an interpretation where he's, we mentioned, a Columbus or Messiah character that Shatov also looked up to previously. And now we see this ugly side of him where he's really just trying to create disruption, at least. But then I realize the whole chapter at Tikhon's is presumably being told by our narrator, Anton Governov. And we don't exactly know what to make of Governov's testimony. Is Governov a biased reporter? To what extent can we trust his testimony? And we've talked about how these rumors, where, even in Nikolai's confession, we have to infer so much. There's a discussion there about whether Stavrogan says, I made it all up, and then a few paragraphs later, he kind of makes it clear, nah, I didn't make it all up, but maybe I made some of it up, which is this theme throughout the whole novel of our narrator reporting testimony that is we're not sure of. We're really not sure of. And in looking at Tikhon's and thinking about it today, I came to realize that is reality, though. All of us in our lives, we turn on one news broadcast, we catch some tidbit, And then we start spreading that rumor, which the next day is shown to be false. And we actually got, and then these rumors spread. And reality is that we're confronted with inferences, rumors, positive sides, negative sides, slanted text, and we got to make sense of it. But it's not clear that we can.
A pessimistic view, but okay. Doug and then Madeline. Doug, go ahead.
I have a number of things that I'm not quite sure how to approach as quickly as I want to. But I think Dostoevsky is one of those genius psychologists before psychology was even developed. I mean, Freud talks about this, that the playwrights and the novelists understood what was going on decades before the psychologists did. And Jung did it in one way, and Freud did it in another, and Adler did it in another way. And all these different psychologists had their own sort of power, sex, God, they each kind of tackled it from a different angle. But I think it all is trying to deal with the fact that human behavior is not predictable. So does that come from Satan? Does that come from the unconscious? Does that come from a demon? What does that come from? Does it come from a collective mindset that isn't seeing what's really going on? And so I think Dostoevsky is a real master of that. And this is a late novel, so I think he's heading into new territory in one sense, and he's not wrapping it up the way he does with Crime and Punishment, where Sonia saves the evil murderer, while he's in Siberia and he sees the error of his ways. And I don't know that this novel is heading to that kind of cleanup. I do think in human behavior, if you do something wrong, whether the world thinks it's minor or not, you think it's wrong, you sometimes put more effort in being good in the rest of your life. And I think it's what George Bernard Shaw might have meant when he said, you can't have too many vices, because if you do, you can't do them justice. It just turns to gray, and so, if you have one vice, you can control that, or two, maybe you can control that and then do something good with your life. But if you have too many vices, everything falls apart. And I think that comes even in Peer Gynt, the button molder, who comes to Peer Gynt, and Peer Gynt thinks he's going to be saved. And he said, no, if you were an angel or a demon, I could save you, but you're nothing. And so you got to be melted down and reformed into some new human being. I mean, that's what Ibsen does, who thought writing was the job of sitting in judgment on yourself. And I think Dostoevsky, without ever saying that, is clearly sitting in judgment on himself as a young radical. The only other thing I want to, because of the religion thing, I keep going back, and I'm avoiding reading it because Camus is trying to say you can act well without God, and he wrote an adaptation of this, so he's definitely obsessed with the issues of this play. But there's another book that came to my mind, Just Mercy, which has been made into a movie that kind of cuts religion out of the movie. I mean, it's there. Oh, we sang in church choir. But Brian Stevenson, who works with death row inmates, was very influenced by his religious mother and his religious grandmother in ways that are profound and often kind of goofy and funny. And his 20-minute TED Talk conveys more of that than the 2-hour Hollywood movie. The book does it even better. And the key thing for him is that thing that genuine Christians do is they forgive other people. And whether it's their enemies or their friends, there's an element of forgiveness in it. And Brian Stevenson, who works with death row inmates, his conclusion is, you are better than the worst thing you've ever done. And he goes into the death row inmates and says that, you did this terrible thing. It was unforgivable. It was an accident maybe, or it was totally conscious, but you are better than the worst thing you've ever done. And that comes from his Black church upbringing. And, that, yes, we have terrible things in our lives, but you need to find a way to move forward. Right. And do something else. So I think Dostoevsky's sort of wrestling with that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you, Doug. Allison.
Yeah, I think what is interesting is it's like the parallels between, he's going into the whole political discussions about how they want to get rid of one system and replace it with something better. But then on the other hand, he's showing these psychological portraits of these people that are really evil. So, if you're going to move from one political system to the next, if you're not actually doing so as a decent, kind human being, is the next situation actually going to be any better? And it's really prophetic because, like we were talking about this in our earlier meetup, you had the American Revolution that resulted in democracy. The French Revolution resulted in democracy. The Russian Revolution, they're still waiting for democracy. They've never really had one. I mean, and the thing is, it's not just there. There's so many parts of the world where so often they have a revolution or a coup or a million parts of the world. And they're like, oh, we're going to make this all better. And then in come the next crew. And then they do all these awful things that are exactly what the group did before. And they just call it something else. I mean, there's so many parts of the world that this has happened throughout history. But it kind of seems like that maybe part of the problem is that the very best leaders are the people who don't actually want to lead. Because sometimes people who want to lead some people want to do it because they want to do what's best for the people. But it all too often it attracts a person who's very power hungry. It's all about their ego. And then when their ego isn't satisfied, it's like this never-ending hunger. Like they just have to keep feeding it with more and more things to make themselves feel better because they're not really satisfied with who they are. And there's so many leaders around the world throughout history that you could look at them and go, oh, they did it like that, and that one did it like that. And that's the problem, is then that's maybe why it doesn't change. But what I also think is this theme running throughout his books, like when you look at Crime and Punishment, he keeps sort of like playing with this idea of somebody who doesn't feel, I guess it's a nihilist, who's like, well, so what if I, kill, the pawnbroker? Doesn't mean anything. And then it does mean something. And then all the emotions come up because it really does mean something. So it's interesting that he's, always, he has a similar theme, but this time he approached it through the lens of people trying to have social change and kind of showing what hypocrites they really are in the end.
Alison, I want to pick up on this. Sorry, I'm budging a little bit.
Yeah, no.
So yeah, Crime and Punishment, we have Raskolnikov who wants to prove this idea, this theory that there are some great people that can essentially murder other people without recourse because they're just better, right? This and like you said, not feel anything. And he realizes afterwards that he can't escape that. But here, Dostoevsky takes it a step further. Not just you're not feeling it, but you're actually taking active pleasure in it.
Yeah.
And that's what's so despicable and so revolting and so maybe unbelievable to us. But you know what? The world that we live in, it shouldn't really be unbelievable to us. I mean, we've gone, who was it? I really don't like going to current events but I guess just to make an illustration, what's the guy's name? Jeffrey Epstein, right?
Yeah.
We have all these people that are doing very similar things that Stavrogan is doing, enjoying it, enjoying their power, their domination, taking advantage of their position, their ability to go off to some private island and do whatever they want to do. So this is and that's, I guess, what I like about Dostoevsky, and especially at the time, he was considered crazy for writing this kind of stuff because Europe was very much a conservative place and everybody was, for the most part, respectful of family and religion and all this other stuff. And he writes this thing and proposes that, in fact, people will be attracted to violence, attracted to dishonor, right? Remember that? He says, people will follow dishonor. That's actually the thing that they will follow. They will not follow honor. They will follow dishonor. The ability to be completely dishonorable, have no consequences. That sounds attractive to some people, to a group of people. And Russian Revolution was in a way a proof that yes, indeed, you give people a way to commit murder, crime, rape, whatever, and have no consequences. You create this class of untouchables. And boy, you can really build something on that. You can build a very powerful machine on that, and there's something demonic about it too, right? I mean, it's not just lawless. It's actually like it has some sinister, evil thing about it. And I mean, obviously, you can interpret however you want to. Dostoevsky, being a religious man, he took it literally. And I think he is obviously taking the side of Tikhon as a religious person, a true saintly sort of father figure in this novel, maybe the only figure that is actually positive. We've talked about how there's very few positive characters here. Tikhon may be the only positive character in this book. Maybe Shatov is another one, but mostly Tikhon. And he says it's, he believes in demons as a literal thing. Take what, do what you will with that. And so he says, if it's not hallucination, if you've really seen them, then maybe that was the real thing. And that's what you have to overcome, is this demon that is moving you, entering you to do these atrocious things.
It reminds me of there's a scene, I think it was in the movie Hurt Locker, where this guy, came back from either Iraq, Afghanistan, and he's in the grocery store, just pushing the cart with his wife and his children. And he's just they're playing a little music, and he's so utterly bored. And then they show him like a couple weeks later, he goes back. And I think that for some people, it's like you're saying, like a war is like a vacation in a way, because it's like this place where they can do whatever they want and they can let all of their inner demons out, and it's allowed.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, in real life, you kill somebody, you're going to prison. But
Yep.
if you're in war, you kill someone, you're, hooray, look, you did that.
Yeah, for sure. Madeline, you have your hand up. Did you want to say something?
Yes, I would like to hear people's opinions on this bishop. He's a bit of a questionable character because he does say, first he says, okay, this is abominable. He says, don't publish the 300 copies of this, don't send them out. Possibly he's saying it because really that would be another like sociopathic gesture of disdain on Nikolai Stavrogin's part. It would ruin the lives of everyone who knew him because they'd be publicly associated with him. And this whole thing is, so much about gossip, as well as I think literacy. But then, near the end, he's saying, well, so Stavrogin is saying, my goal in all this is to be able to forgive myself. And the bishop says, well, forgiving yourself is good, but God will forgive you even if you don't forgive yourself. And you have a really good career ahead of you, and it would be a shame for you to ruin it. Like, it would be a shame for you to ruin a good career ahead of you. Like, he's not, did he ever say, like, don't do this again? Or I think you should be sent to the madhouse? Or is he just sort of, is he his own weird, I mean, it seems in one sense that he does accept what you were talking about, Phil, the dark side of human nature. I certainly have times when I want to just tear it all down, set it on fire, and howl at the moon. I don't do it. I think just acknowledging it to myself is probably enough. So we have, we all have this kind of massive shadow side. And Tikhon seems to acknowledge that, but at the same time, he seems sort of almost nonchalant about the whole thing. I mean, shouldn't he be horrified and judgmental, or don't priests do that? I would love to hear what other people thought of this guy.
Okay.
Because he does seem to be condoning raping the child, basically. Saying this is human nature, this is how people have always been.
He's condoning it, but I don't think he's surprised either. Doug, Hanita, am I pronouncing that right? And Ginny.
Yeah, he does that, and that's an odd thing. However, I think what a priest does is sort of, he wants forgiveness, right? Okay, forgive him, and then move on with your life. You have an important career ahead of you. I think that is what priests do historically, is discard people. They don't cancel them out because they're bad people. But then what freaks him out, Stavrogan, is when the priest somehow senses the point that CJ brought up right at the beginning. How did he know he was going to do something worse? There was some part of his priestly experience that gives him the sensitivity to know, oh, you got something much worse in your back pocket and you're going to do that. And that sort of discounts the whole idea of forgiveness, because he knows he's carrying a bigger gun that he's planning to use. And that freaks out Stavrogan. I think that's at the very end of the scene. So I agree with Madeline. I think it's a really interesting point that he lets this happen, but I think there's a reason. I think his function is to make people productive and not discard the evil, but to turn them into something more angelic, like what the button molder says. You know, if you're really terrible, I can make an angel out of you. If you're middling gray, if I reverse the process, you'll still be gray. You still won't be anything. I can't do anything with somebody who's not an angel or a demon. So I think the priest's job is to try to transform him into something good. But then he realizes he's holding something worse in his back pocket. And the way Stavrogan leaves, and he's the most freaked out at that point in this play, the whole book. He loses his bearings going, oh, he sees through me.
Damn psychologist, right?
Yeah, he's like, he knows I'm a serial predator. He knows, and I think if you're a priest, you know the people who are going to really repent. I once lived with a woman working in a battered women clinic, and if men did it once and apologized and got help, they didn't tend to do it again. If they did it a second time, it was a real danger. If they did it a third time, they were an addict.
Yeah.
They were going to continue to batter the woman until she took serious legal police help. So it's that, I don't know, that's my associations to this.
Okay. No, that's good. That's interesting insight. Hanita and then Jeannie.
Yeah, so I'm Janita.
Oh, Janita, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's all right. Yeah, that's absolutely fine. I've been most fascinated by artists and their work on their canvases of exploring this pathology in human beings, especially paintings by Picasso, and more so Bacon, for that matter. Like I've done a study on an Indian artist, F.N. Souza, whose canvases are, it's like he painted hell. So the hell inside human beings. And he said that, like in the Renaissance, people painted such beautiful human bodies, looking very angelic and so beautiful, but he wasn't interested in that. And he was more about exploring this dark side in human beings. So his canvases are full of these horrendous figures of human beings, so twisted and they're so horrifying, and it's very difficult actually to meditate on his art. So besides that, there was another thing which came up in my mind, is like there's this theory of how a mob comes up, suddenly, like, there's this life flowing on a street, and there's shops and people going about, and suddenly there's this commotion, and a group of people just burst into that scene with a very different kind of energy. And then there are these people who are just sitting on the sidewalk, maybe could be beggars or people who are so insignificant and so on. And this whole theory of how a mob just, like how a flash flood happens, and people just joining in. So the psychology behind that, they said, was that people who feel so powerless in their lives, who are so insignificant, they're completely obscured in life, like in this whole capitalist society, that they have no role at all, and they're always slighted and maybe ridiculed and humiliated. And when this kind of a scenario comes about, or a war, comes about. So then all these elements become very strong in that. Suddenly they come into power, and there's lawlessness, and they can do whatever they want. And that gives them a huge charge. They feel so important, and all these demons which were inside them just like go berserk, and it's a very bizarre outcome. So yeah, so that's also very interesting to contemplate on. Yeah, there's another one which is by Sam Keen, the American author and philosopher. So he had written a little passage. It's a kind of a poem actually, how human beings create an enemy. So, I'm just reading a few lines from there. So he says, start with an empty canvas and sketch on board, outline the forms of men, women, and children. Dip into the unconscious well of your own disowned darkness with a wide brush and stain the strangers with the sinister hue of your shadow. Trace onto the face of the enemy the greed, the hatred, the carelessness you dare not claim as your own. Obscure the sweet individuality of each face. Erase all hints of the myriad loves, hopes, and fears that play through the kaleidoscope of every little heart. Twist the smile until it forms the downward arc of cruelty. Strip flesh from bone until only the abstract skeleton of death remains. Exaggerate each feature until man is metamorphoses into a beast, a vermin, an insect. Fill in the background with malignant figures from ancient nightmares that you've had of devils, demons. And when your icon of the enemy is complete, you'll be able to kill without guilt and slaughter without shame. The thing you destroy will have become merely an enemy of God, an impediment in your personal and your collective history.
Well, yeah, I think that's pertinent in some ways here because they talk about when Stavrogin and Verkhovensky talk about the society that they're trying to, secret society they're trying to build, they talk about the dissolution of individuality, even not even just individual rights and freedoms, but individuality. And in this, there is that absolution that Janita was talking about, where you can perform these acts of violence or lawlessness without any feeling of repercussion or guilt, because it's not you, it's you're part of this machine. And people make excuses about, well, I'm just following orders, type of thing. And yeah, that's tragic. Jeannie.
That was very beautiful, but I don't have very much to say about anything after that. But in the Tikhon scene, it's so much like a psychiatrist. At one point, he even says, "Oh, your mother comes here all the time, once a month." And that really rang, like it was sort of a secret to go to a psychiatrist when it first started. But then, you found out everybody else was going too. The crime really wasn't rape. And I think that's why he took the second page out. The crime was driving her to kill herself. And, for that, regardless of anything else, he's absolutely responsible. I mean, he was there. He and so it's very hard having some kind of crime like that on your head for the rest of your life.
Why do you think she kept saying, I killed God in me? What do people think about this little line that she keeps saying, the little girl, I killed God in me?
I gotta hear Madeline's answer because
Yeah, go ahead, Madeline.
I have a different point.
Okay, thanks, Joe. I thought it was because she's a child and she takes on, and as children do, she takes on a disproportionate amount of responsibility for what's happening around her and what the adults do. And she knows at this point probably that sex before marriage is a sin. And she has gravely wounded God by doing this thing, and takes it so personally that in fact she has killed God. So that's my interpretation, is that it's a child's point of view of everything.
Mm-hmm. That's probably right. I agree with that. Joe, go ahead, and then Maritza.
I'm just thinking back to like what other things Strogan has done, and wanting to run off into the mountains, and with what is her name? I want to call her Leviathan. Am I saying that correctly?
Who we're talking about?
Stravogan, like essentially when he wanted to run off into the mountains and read to his wife essentially for the rest of their lives. In Switzerland.
Yeah.
Something like that. And I kind of like thought about that, and in a way that's kind of he's almost crying out at that point just to get for forgiveness of some sort. Like I'll run away in the mountains, and will be my penance of some sort. I don't know. I'm trying to figure this individual out, because he is pretty evil on every level. But at the same time, maybe that's the point. He's just tormented. He's completely tormented. I don't know. I just thought.
Yeah, I'm thinking out loud too. Marissa, I'll give you a chance to say something in a second. I wanted to mention that perhaps, we talked about Nietzsche and some of these Nietzschean qualities that Stavrogin exhibits, being the superhuman, having the super control of himself, because he talks a lot about being in control the whole time. And that's why in his confession, he says, I don't make any excuses for me based on illness or environment or anything else, because I was fully in control the whole time. When he hid that knife and the girl got beaten for it, when he went into her, when he ignored her, he was fully in control, the same as he was when he did not reply to, did not strike Shadov back. And that gave him immense pleasure that he was able to control himself. So he has this almost like this superior ability, and he knows about it, and he takes full advantage of it. And even his repentance and confession is in some ways an expression of this superhuman ability. He wants to humiliate himself beyond what anybody's capable of. And Tikhon, I think, says, no, you can't do that. You can't ask for forgiveness and redemption by an extra accomplishment. You have to renounce that. And that's why I think he is telling him not to publish it, because that's just another way that you are showing us how great you are, how capable you are of humiliating yourself beyond what anybody has done before. But what you really need is to actually, he almost invites him to join the monastery there and to become his follower, his disciple. And Stavrogin laughs it off and says, like, are you serious? You're going to offer that to me, this kind of life, this kind of ending? And then he shudders, the monk, he shudders because he realizes there's much more sinister, something else is brewing here. And, that's what we'll leave off with, this angry Stavrogin saying, damn psychologist, he saw through me. So Maritza, yeah, go ahead.
So the little girl, why does she say I've killed the God within me? I think it's just another way of pointing to us the foolishness of trying to abdicate religion from our lives. I think it's a matter of, because they make a big deal of showing that she gave in and she responded to his advances.
Mhm.
And I think that it's a way that she's internalizing that as though the fault is her own. And I think it's just one of those things of, if you reject God, you're gonna
Mhm.
find
So this is
yourself.
similar to what Madeline was saying about, as a child, she is taking too much responsibility, as children tend
But
to do.
I would almost say though that it's being shown to us as immaterial as to whether or not she is a child. That any one of us in that position would feel the same, is what I think we're being shown. That if we embrace an evil,
Mhm.
we will feel as though we have sinned and killed God.
Right.
That's what I think that we're being told there.
But I think there's also something about, and maybe Dostoevsky has a soft spot for little children. In a lot of his books, there's this reference to a child's tear, and there are a lot of references that somehow hint at the fact that he had a specific soft spot for little kids. Maybe it was their innocence, maybe it was their lack of sort of their guilelessness. And in this case, again, Matryoshka is this, obviously fictional character, but representing this passage from innocence to guile, and the fact that Stavrogin acts as this agent of evil that actually takes her from this child's world, which is not happy, by the way. We read about
No, it was
horrible already, but yet she is still a child, and he takes her forcefully from that world and plunges her into this other world. But beyond that, she feels guilty for her part in it, whatever that really is.
Right. So what's something interesting that you make me think of actually is the idea that Peter sees in Nikolai the person to be a killer of innocence in general without even knowing it. So he wants to use Nikolai as his figurehead.
Yeah.
Because he
His
wants
charisma.
that 90%
Mhm.
to follow him. So that's interesting. I don't know if there's any validity there, but I'm seeing that 90% is that little girl.
Yeah, no, that's interesting too. Doug, and then Madeline, I think you raised your hand. Doug, you're muted.
The moment when she makes that statement, I've killed God, it really sort of is startling, but it struck me that it may not even be rationally based, that it's like almost a mystical intuition or a fairy tale reality, or it's not even aware of the sin per se, but she knows there's a bigger sin at work or something. It was odd. It's such an odd statement from such a young person that I liked what Maritza said about it, but I'm still circling around it. The only comment I wanted to make is the Nietzsche stuff is very interesting, and this may be a bridge to the project that CJ wants to do later, because a lot of these ideas that you have to tear down the mind-forged manacles of religion that a lot of people had for centuries, that when the Lutherans were slaughtering Lutherans because they differed on the communion, and the blood was rolling in the streets of Germany, not from Catholics killing Lutherans, which they did, but that the bloody history of religion, there is this reaction that you just have to tear it all down. And I think a lot of that starts with Byron and Shelley and Mary Shelley and Frankenstein, I think I think it's an interesting kind of bridge, because she anticipated a lot of these questions from hanging out with Byron and Shelley and the early romantic movement that was sort of saying there's something wrong with traditional morality. And Ibsen also sort of, what is the higher morality versus what we're sort of handed? So I don't really have an answer to that, but I think it'll be an interesting bridge to Frankenstein.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Doug. Madeline?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, Maritza, because it, in a way it is irrelevant at what age the little girl was a victim. that often people who are victims of terrible crimes or very bad accidents will feel a sense of guilt and responsibility that even an adult victim knows is not logical. It doesn't make sense, but it's a feeling anyway. So like what Doug was saying about it's a feeling. And I wanted to go back also to Pyotr Stepanovich, because there was just one little scene where he follows Stavrogin out from the meeting of the conspirators and says, you know, I've turned you into something. I have embedded you at the center of my imaginary fantasy world that I am weaving, just as other people do with Stavrogin. And he offers to kill the guy's wife.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's like, I'll take care of the problem for you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people, you know, they want to, it's as if they want to help him, but they only want to help him because they want to use him. They don't actually, maybe the bishop is the only one who would actually want to help him, but everyone else is sort of hoisting him around as a symbol of whatever they've got going on. You know, whether it's his wife's idea of him as a prince, or the conspirators, or this guy, or what Shatov thinks of him, and Kirillov thinks of him, and then they're getting disillusioned about it. You know, there's a weird way in which I guess someone without a positive center, maybe that's what happens to them, and they get sort of hoisted up the political ladder because of it. I'm not going to draw any modern parallels.
If only we knew what that positive center was, right?
I think
Sure.
we all know what it is. It's just hard to articulate.
Well, yes, but that's the point, isn't it? And you know, I think we talked about religion being the sort of way of tying people together, or rather agreeing on a shared set of principles and morality. It's obviously maybe just one of the ways we can do it, but up to really recently was the only way we knew how to do it, to find these common points of this positive center, if you will, and discounting all the evil that organized religion has obviously brought into existence, that we all know of. At the same time, we don't have anything to compare it to. So we don't know what, everybody keeps telling us, especially in Dostoevsky's time, oh, we just need to get rid of religion and we're going to usher this new utopia. Religion is what's been holding us back. And this novel, of course, is a reaction to that. And when he wrote it, it was not popular. Just like it's not a popular idea today. When you come to any kind of college campus and you start evangelizing them to turn to Jesus, that's not going to be very popular, because that's not what they want to hear. They want to hear about the opposite of that, of humanism and secular ideals and so forth. Not to say there's anything wrong with those things either. My point being is that the novel historically at that time was not a very popular novel. And the reason was everybody was going with the crowd saying, we just need to really get rid of our prejudices. Our prejudices and our historical norms is what's been holding us back. We need to completely abandon it. And there were people with different degrees of radical agenda in that mindset. And Nechayev, the prototype that we've been following in the character of Pyotr Verkhovensky, he was the most radical representation of that, which is to say, anybody who doesn't agree with us he's going to be dead in our new world. We're not going to tolerate any kind of dissent. There is no dissent. Our view is the right view, and you don't agree with us, you're dead. So good luck in our new world of utopia. So that's Dostoevsky. His idea is that no, it's been very hard for us to find these points of agreements, salient points of morality, shared morality, etc., it's not easy to just invent them out of nothing. People tend to, and we don't have to necessarily agree with this idea of God or demons or anything else, but this idea that you have this historical narrative and it tends to bind people together culturally. We know how powerful that is. It's very powerful in Islam. It's very powerful in everywhere else. So why we're discarding it in the West is really something to question, because we know that religion ties people together very powerfully across the world. I'm thinking of all the different Islamic countries and Muslims traveling. When they see another Muslim in a foreign country, it's like they owe something to each other. They're comrades. They feel that camaraderie, that commonness, and it transcends really ethnicity or any kind of personal relations. So it's nothing to be laughed at. And Dostoevsky, he saw that. I think he saw the power of having this shared vocabulary, if you will, and also he saw the danger of just exploding that. And everything in what we've seen so far, if you recall, starts out with a planned destabilization of that. You destabilize the culture of society, the cultural norms, and then everything else just falls apart. And by the way, I don't know if any of you read Gramsci, an Italian cultural Marxist. Gramsci's idea was you don't need to take power by force. You take power by attacking the culture that binds people together and serves as the basis for their support of the regime. So if you want a revolution in a country, what you need to do is not attack the regime directly, physically, but what you need to do is undermine their beliefs that give that regime power. And of course, in Dostoevsky, the regime or the ideology that's Stein cited together is very much of a Christian sort of fundamental, whatever you want to call it, positive center, like Madeline mentioned. Okay, a lot of people want to say something. Allison and then Jing Tang.
Yeah, you just hit on what I was just thinking, that it's kind of interesting that throughout history, in all these corners of the globe that didn't have any connection to each other back then, they all had certain similarities. You always had religion, you always had art, you always had dance, music, and you always had marriage. And what this is capturing is this moment where they're dissolving all of this. And now we're at a point now where we just like take it for granted that people aren't religious, but really it's a very odd thing. I mean, it used to be, whether you're worshiping the sun or the mountain or the earth, but everything had a meaning and a value to it. And we have separated all of that. And at what great cost. You do wonder, like, in the, like America and Europe have some of the highest heart disease is the #1 killer. Well, why? Because we don't have that connection that comes through having these social communities in a way, because religion does more than just believe in something. It unites a town or a community. And now within every town, it's like it's unusual for people to go to any kind of religious service, or if there is one, there's like 17 kinds, but you don't have that unity that you used to have. And that, I think that unity is what provided stability. So it is really interesting how this book it's a warning. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Absolutely.
Like you don't need to get rid of every single thing we've ever known. Maybe like, okay, if there's a fire at the factory, maybe you should do something to protect the workers, but that doesn't mean throw out everything,
Right. And Dostoevsky, he is very nuanced too. He gives us this guy, Semyon Yakovlevich, who is kind of who takes advantage of people's religious, what's the word I'm looking for? Not faith, superstition. He takes advantage of people's superstition And so there are all these women that are following him and bringing him gifts and all the rest of it. And at the end of the day, he's just sitting there and spouting obscenities at them. And they are so happy that he notices them. So sort of this reverse psychology thing going on. And so Dostoevsky is not blind to the fact that of the abuses of the church at the time, but he thinks that whatever the abuses are, the alternative is much, much worse. And of course, historically, he's been proven absolutely correct. The thing to do is let's get rid of the abuses, like you're saying, Els, and not throw out the baby with the bathwater. So yeah, I think he had something there. Jing Tang?
Yeah.
Did I say that correctly?
Yeah, Jing is good. So actually, I have a different opinion on religion and spirituality. I think human need spirituality, but maybe not religion. Religion, is, I see a lot of people I think when you grow up in some belief, when you get older, you actually tend to go back to that belief. That what happened to Putin and Xi Jinping. They both grew up in this Soviet socialist idea, and they end up, they believe that's the only solution. Same as we were talking at the digital, and they said Catholic the solution. And I said, what? Christian was developed after Catholic because all the problems with it. And now we go back saying that is the solution for the new problems. And then nobody actually, all the young people don't even believe it. Because I think the reason they think that's the solution, because that's what they know. And because they know what they can offer, so they think they can solve the problem. But the reality is, it can't. You have to find a new way. When people have no idea, no individualism, it's easy to believe, like Muslim you mentioned. It's easy for them blindly believe one religion. But when people are educated, they have independent thinking. It's hard to do so. So people already evolved. You can't let them go back to be very unified. So we need a more encompass, more diverse spirituality to unify people with their individuality instead of trying to reverse to the old uniform religion to solve problem. That's not possibility. So I believe that that's the only real solution. And I agree with you. The only way to destroy society is through culture. That's why China was trying to block all this internet because they realized how Western culture was damaging their regime, and that's the brainwash, the way they can brainwash their people and believe in their control. But so I really think we all facing and realizing all the problems we are facing. When we destroy religion, we don't have anything to replace, because the reason it exists, they feed humans' need, spirituality, But when we get rid of it, there's a lot of people in the West Coast, in Seattle, are spiritual, but they're not religious. But they all individualize, they can't really social. There's no place for social. I think instead of a church, maybe we can have social center, culture center, something like provide a place for people communion.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. In good old Soviet Russia, we used to have these community centers like that, where you can get together and you would do something together to foster a sense of community. However, in reality, there's something very powerful about stories and narratives that have circulated for thousands of years. Nothing about the story per se is important. It's just the fact that it has this historical dimension to it. And I keep going back to Emil Durkheim and his idea that, the core of religion is not about believing in some supernatural being. The core of religion, according to Durkheim, is this ability of religion to create a set of arbitrary rituals almost that people can use to separate sacred from profane. And it almost doesn't matter where you draw that line. As long as you have a line, then you can build from that foundation, you can actually build real morality, like kind of like the 10 Commandments or anything like that. It's not an easy task, and that's what I guess Dostoevsky keeps coming back to. That it's very easy to destroy. It's not so easy to build. Destroying is pretty. It takes about a minute. but building takes centuries sometimes, and that's the issue.
Yeah, I want to share one thing.
Mhm.
When I go to, I go to different churches when I come to American 20 years ago,
Mhm.
and I found I don't really like all those Orthodox, so I end up go to Unitarian church, and I really like what the Unitarian church is talking about. Like believe in truth, not Bible, all this stuff. But what I found interesting is like somehow their lack of something in common, so they don't really like that feeling in the regular church, like everybody's united somehow. It's so I already understand what you're talking about, because I do feel that even in Unitarian church, it's a similar feeling. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah. Even the rituals, whatever church you go to, the rituals that you get used to, right? Baptism, confirmation in Catholic Church, the Eucharist, or communion, like they call it in Protestant churches, or again, any kind of ritual that you do, it creates this something that is larger than any individual person. And what Stavrogan and all these other conspirators are talking about is taking all of that down and to a common denominator, where what people are not differentiated anymore, or they don't have anything that's above them really. All they have is themselves and their desires, which are supposed to be degraded to the point of where they're just looking for gratify their most basic animal almost needs, and that's the goal. And that's the kind of people they want to, they want to regenerate into paradise. So that's the program they have. Joe and then Madeline.
Sorry about that. Something that just I forget, this was a while back. I think I was thinking about how Peter and there's this distinction as this idea of there's this like kind of, he's a man. I will say this, he is a man of I'm sorry, I keep getting a call. He is a man of action. Like it's not theoretical to him, versus like everybody else. It seems like it's like this utopian society is kind of a theory. It's kind of something where that they're coming up with, and this is kind of problematic in general, is that it does, I think Dostoevsky does a really interesting job in highlighting like this is what it's like to actually act on these ideas, versus this is the ideas that intellectuals kind of sometimes just think about them as a utopian society. And I think there's that interesting contrast of like showing us like it's less about inquiry and discussions. And there's even this kind of Peter kind of abhors the idea that that these individuals, like that everyone else is not willing to take the actions that he is. So I think that's there's a lot to that in general, because I think that sometimes when we theoretically come up with an idea and it leads to this whole idea like, well, if we just got rid of religion, that will answer all our problems. And the simplicity that comes along with some kind of these answers, like it's never that simple. And these are complex systems that we're dealing with.
Mhm.
And so what happens is when when you take away one of these institutions, you have to understand what their functions and like why they were there in the first place. And like if whatever's going to replace them is not sufficient, it could end up very could end up very badly for everyone. So I mean, there was just really quickly, there was an interesting debate between Sam Harris and Ben Shapiro one day, and it was the idea based on this discussion essentially with religion. And Ben Shapiro is obviously for religion, whereas Sam Harris was arguing against it. He says like, well, religion did offer us education, blah, blah, blah. And he says, yeah, that's a complete lack of imagination, though, that they were serving the form of a government at that point. Like they were, like and what happens is they got corrupt in the interim. And then you got to see, okay, well, what were the good things that it did? And then kind of need to allow it to certain parts of that institution to die, and then some of the but not necessarily throw away the whole institution altogether.
Right.
Like
Right.
I think that and that's what Sam Harris is like, making a very good point on,
Mhm.
getting, well, anyway, I'll go to the whole thing. It
Right.
was a good
Okay. Janita, Madeline, and then El Hiscox.
I completely agree with Joe. He's made a very important point that it's the shadow which takes center stage. So that shadow could be anything that we are not paying attention to, and so it's gone into the bag, and then it becomes so colossal, and it plays its role, and then we are so horrified. So yeah, it brings to mind Robert Bly's book Iron Man in the 70s. I think he wrote that book, or the early 80s, and it was about like feminism had taken its roots, and it was like it was saying masculinity and pathology came together, and so he started the men's movement that time. He said, like, you're trying to tame men, you're trying to make them mannered, and but we cannot disregard the inherent qualities or the characteristics which exist in human beings. So basically, I think as human beings, and with this whole concept of a mannered civilized society, we in a way disregard or push these elements into that shadow bag, that long bag that Robert Bly spoke about. And so we go with one polarity, like you see with religion and with families, in your own bringing up, their parents who tell their children not to be angry, not to be aggressive. Oh, that's not good manners. These small little things when we are growing up. And so you don't learn to express your anger in a healthy way, in a way where it can flow out, and you can take up a position for whatever you're fighting for, or you're angry about, but then you're not harming others. So this could begin in your homes, in your families, or a little fight which happens between children, but we don't do that. We completely push out these factors, these characteristics in human behavioral patterns far back. And so there is no other way but to be expressed violently when we grow up, because we haven't learned to handle all this. So I think, that balance, of what Alison spoke about, or religion, is very important. It brings about communities. And then Zheng talks about, oh, but if there are communities, then there's conformity, and the individual does not get a channel to express themselves. So each community is going with a polarity, one this side or the other side. Whereas maybe the answer somewhere is in the balance of these dualities, these polarities. For everything, it's the middle part, like Buddhism, like go by the middle path, have a little of the darkness, but know how to handle that darkness, how to mitigate it, how to have it flow out in a measured manner, right? Of how to handle it. That self-regulation is so important. And then go with the light, but don't get entwined with the light, because if you get entwined with the light, or we get entwined with the dark, we are not just going anywhere. So it's not entwinement with any of these polarities, but understanding the both sides, the human nature, and then, finding a trajectory ahead, and then making progression. And then all institutions in society have to be mapped on this. But right now, it's like different cultures in this world, and each one is going with one polarity and thinking themselves to be superior. Yeah, I think, it's the balance.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Janine. Madeline, and then Elvis Cox.
Well, thank you everyone who's been talking about religion, because Phil, now I see what you mean. that the book is very much about religion. And so the religions, I don't disagree with religion as a social construct. I think that's part of it, but certainly not the entire thing. And going back to what Allison had said about, say, a mountain or a tree or a body of water, that Dostoevsky is saying, this is what happens when we eliminate our connection with something that is much bigger than human beings. And we put our hopes in human beings. These are the different ways that it can go wrong. And these are the different kinds of, goofy, well-meaning, not so well-meaning, or sociopathic people who can make it go wrong. Whether it's a small town gossip or, whatever. The religions that have all been used as examples, and when we're talking about them around the world, they're all religions with big, long written traditions that we're referring to, that are big societal institutions. And I just wanted to point out that most religions have been oral, and in those, they have no word for religion. They don't have a word for it because it's not a separate aspect of life in any way. It's part of the world. It's part of how things are, is to have that connection with something bigger in whatever forms it takes in the world around you. So I think it's really kind of it's not entirely a novelty. I learned in another meetup group that that within Hinduism, there is actually a compartment for atheism. It allows for atheism. You can be an atheist and still be a Hindu. But I think other than that, I think it's quite new for people to be stripping away morality from religion and religion from anything, because it was embedded in everything and part of everything. It was that was life. It wasn't a separate thing that you could pick up or discard or not go to church. It was just how the world was. Maybe still is.
To a large degree, probably more than we realize, I think. Thank you, Alan. Hiscox, your turn, finally.
Yeah, hi. Hi there, thank you. Yes, I just wanted to comment that the Unitarian Universalist Church does have ritual. They have prayers, Sunday meetings, choir, and they seem to have room for everyone, but you will not continue going, I think, unless you have some reverence and love in your heart. And then the second thing is that within Judaism, according to Leah Roston, and I've seen it the case that there are Jews who are atheists. They just like the culture and the ritual. So I think we do see this, and I thought that might be of interest. Thanks.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, that's again. I keep mentioning Emil Durkheim. If you haven't read his monumental work on religion, I highly recommend it. It's very interesting. It's actually about the Aborigines of Australia, not about Christianity or anything else, because his idea was, and this is actually true scientifically, when you're trying to examine a phenomena, it's helpful to examine it in its most simplest form, because it's stripped down from all the paraphernalia to its most basic elements. And what he finds when he examines it is that it's really more about these binding these areas of commonality that can be used to delineate sacred from profane. And of course, in Dostoevsky, we've already mentioned that these acts of Stavrogin, a lot of them are about mixing up and destroying, purposefully destroying any kind of distinction between profane and sacred. If you remember last time we read about this boy who killed himself, and what did they do? Those young people, that group that visited, that wanted to see the hotel room where he killed himself. Well, there was some food on the table and they started eating it, right there when he, so there was no, this concept, why did they do it? I mean, it wasn't maybe, I don't know, it didn't seem like it was a conscious thing, but it still made that same effect of, we don't care, somebody died, whatever, they're just another day, so let's have a drink, let's eat something. So this idea of profane and sacred, which ties society together, whether it's marriage as an institution, whether it's death as or life as a precious thing, whether it's innocence of a child, or these other things that we kind of take for granted because they're so embedded, so deep in us. We've really come to take them for granted. But when you think about it, nothing is taken for granted if you just say it's all just atoms and molecules and, like a purely materialistic world with no mystery, with no spirituality. I think Jing Tang mentioned, well, what we need is not religions, but spirituality. Well, yeah, but spirituality, you can't just will it into existence from nothingness. It actually kind of coalesces from these traditions. Maybe you can extract it from these traditions and separate it in a bottle, in a test tube. Excuse me. But we're, like I said, we're still part of that grand experiment to see if that's even possible. Okay, we're coming up on 2.5 hours now, so I think we probably should wrap up here. I did want to mention that next time we're meeting, we're going to be reading part 3, first 4 chapters, and then we just have one more meeting to finish reading, and then we're going to have hopefully an extra meeting to look back on the entire work and see if there are any takeaways that we want to summarize and highlight. Any last words from Doug or CJ? Do you guys want to leave us with anything profound?
Not really right now. I wanted to thank everybody for the range of discussion tonight. I thought it was very interesting, and some of the biggest questions are still unanswered for me, but
as always.
But thank you. It was really interesting range of things that came up.
Rather timely that we're having a discussion of a Russian writer right now.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, it was. I enjoy listening, but I can't help but think with what's going on.
Yes, indeed,
yeah,
indeed, terrible.
I had one comment about was the confession true? Somebody raised a really interesting question. Did he make it up? And I think that raises a question that's important to Dostoevsky, that art can be a poison pill just as much as an action can be, can let loose poison. And the Greek philosophers argued about that. Poetry was by Plato considered evil, that it let loose dangerous energies. And so that's an ongoing debate.
For sure. CJ, any last words of wisdom?
Yeah, I mean, thanks everyone. It was, as you said, wide-ranging. We covered a lot of the important issues. I think we should get back to the breakouts. Those helped a lot. So hopefully next time we can structure the comments so that there's a midpoint where we can break it off. I'm looking forward to the next 4 chapters, and then the 4 chapters after that to finish it out. The last 2 sets of reading, by my calculations, it's about 105 followed by 109, which is sort of the midpoint of the lengths. We've had, the last one was a little short. So this next 2 weeks, it'll be 22 or 3 pages more than last time. But that's much less, much easier than one of the early periods where we had like 120 pages. So we're not going to that level. So it's a little bit more than the last 2 weeks. So you might need to budget your time for that.
Right. Okay. Thank you, CJ. Yeah, I just want to say that I highly recommend going back to certain passages. several of you have mentioned that, you might want to reread certain things. And I actually find it very helpful. I do it myself, even though I've read this several times. I like to go back to certain passages to read them after, you do an initial read to just sort of cover the material, but then certain passages that really require some extra reflection, I think, and especially that chapter with Stavrogin's confession is definitely a passage like that certainly warrants maybe several times of reading over. So if you do have time, I do recommend. I think you'll get more out of it personally. I do when I reread some of these. Okay, thanks everyone. We will see you in 2 weeks. Enjoy.
Thank you, Philip.